So for my Connecting Voices discussion, I decided to focus on gender diversity. Um, I could have gone way back thinking about the ways that early theorists actually said that women did not have the mental capacity to be managers, but didn't think that was appropriate since that is categorically wrong. But I did want to go back to Rosabeth Kanter, who in the late 70s, she examined organizations to understand how women experienced organizations. And so one of the things that she developed was a typology of majority-minority distributions, and really didn't tie it necessarily to gender, but to any minority group. And she said, obviously at 100 to 0, that's a uniform group. There's no diversity at all. When you get to a skewed group, that's that 85-15, so you're starting to get some exposure. And then tilted groups is 65-35, and then you can ultimately, hopefully, the goal would be to get to a balanced group, 60-40, 50-50. And she went on to explain that skewed groups basically have a token presence of any group, minority group. And in that situation, that token presence definitely have greater visibility, which leads to performance pressures, whether it's, you are representing a whole group of people through your behavior, or you might decide to shut down and not participate in that group because of that pressure. And the presence of tokens is like a self-reinforcing thing that continues to have those low numbers. When you move to tilted or balanced, that shift brings about positive things. So minority members can start to become allies. And more recent research would say, or right around, I think more of a contemporary to Kanter, started to say, hey, 30% is the minimum that you need to start to have some positive change within those groups and start to impact culture. So there were some great things that were happening along that way. So when we start to think about new thinking as we went along, and this wasn't just now that they're figuring this out, but over the last maybe 10, 15 years, they started to really look at critical mass and say, where's the point where that positive impact is happening? And they found that if you have at least 3 people, and most of this research was done on board of directors, when you think that maybe that board is 10 to 15 people, which lines up mainly with that 30%, but you have to have at least 3, they can start to have positive impact on things like CSR disclosure, decision-making. So there was a lot of research really based because there was a lot of research done on board of directors and gender diversity, because especially in Europe and in other places around the world, they were developing quotas for how many females were on boards. And so they were trying to say, what's the point of that positive implications? So there's that element, but then there's also been research on how do you improve the pipeline? Because what they were finding is that women were getting into organizations. So it wasn't that they weren't there, the voices were there, but they weren't getting pushed up into positions of influence in organizations. So the Chow 2019 was a podcast that I listened to recently that was focusing on sponsorship, and sponsorship as a way for women to have that external form of support, that person, if they're their sponsor, they can provide the social capital to get them access to things that they may not otherwise have access to, whether it's a conference or to a meeting that they weren't invited to, or just that connection to other people that might be useful in their career. Interesting point about that interconnection of reputations, that if you're sponsoring someone, if they do a good job, it benefits the sponsor and vice versa. And so that reputations become very interlinked, which I think is kind of interesting to think about. The other piece of this, and the Wooten and Pelley article, was that through the pandemic, that has forced this level of accessibility that women previously weren't able to have. So a lot of organizations said, work from home doesn't work. That's not something that we're going to say is something that we're going to do. We're not going to allow that flexibility. But because we were all forced into this remote work environment, it's allowed organizations to see, yes, this can work. Flexible schedules can work, which women, all people, but women in particular have been asking for many years. So I think that from a pipeline standpoint, this could open the pipeline, and it remains to be seen whether that's the case or not. So compare and contrast some changes that have happened. In Kanter's day, women were rarely in positions of influence, and now different is women are present at all levels of the organization. So while she was really focused on what's the experience of women, how can we get them into the room, now we're focusing less on understanding the value of that diversity, but how can we give women the right opportunities to overcome some of those broken rungs in the ladder. And that broken rung phrase was from a McKinsey & Company report, Women in the Workplace 2019, where they said women were at 68% male, 38% getting into that manager role. So there's quite a discrepancy. When you get up to the C-suite, it's 79-21. So there is a point still where those opportunities are disappearing, whether women are taking themselves out of the running or they're not seeing those opportunities, so they're not pursuing them. They're not being sponsored or mentored into those roles, and there's not people advocating for them to say, hey, we can find ways for that path to include you. So they don't maybe see themselves in that route. So there is definitely continue to be the conversation about how do we not only get women into the workplace, but continue to support them throughout their careers and give them the opportunities to be in those positions of influence that we've found to be so beneficial, to have a diverse group making decisions and being more creative and more innovative, all those benefits of diversity that we have found. So that is my Connecting Voices presentation, and a good example of what I'll be looking for with your presentations as you connect an early theorist or an idea to a more current point of view related to that idea, whether it's conflict management or it could be performance management, change, all those things. And then a little bit of a compare and contrast, what's new, what's different, what's the same, and maybe things haven't changed. So a little bit of an idea